Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Today is Thursday, July 11th, and today we're going to be reacting to Team USA's exhibition win over Team Canada last night. It was the first of the showcase games for Team USA, so ultimately did not have any impact in terms of the results of the Olympics, but I thought it was really fun to see, obviously the best players in the world on Team USA come together and get to have them in a more competitive atmosphere. Obviously, we have the All-Star game, but definitely a different juice to it. So we're going to be breaking down that game, sort of my key takeaways from it. Additionally, on some basketball topics, we're going to be talking about the reports that the Cleveland Cavaliers are looking to sign Evan Mobley to a max contract extension. While not a massive surprise, this is another player from that 2021 class that is going to be getting massive amounts of money. And I just want to talk about sort of the NBA franchise philosophy behind that decision, whether or not it is the right move to jump at the opportunities to pay these young players that really haven't established themselves all too much, these massive contracts. And then I additionally want to touch on the San Antonio Spurs edition of Chris Paul. They brought in Harrison Barnes as well, so bringing in some more veteran players to place alongside Victor Wembanyama after a year where there was, frankly, a lot of incompetence that was surrounding him, and whether or not the Spurs can, start to turn their franchise around sooner rather than later. And then to wrap up the show, we're going to be running through the Home Run Derby participants and the state of that event, and additionally finish off with Angel Reese's double-double streak. The WNBA rookie phenom extended it to 14 games with their win yesterday, and I do have some thoughts about how it went down and why I think that it is a little bit overrated. But before we get into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section wherever you follow us to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports as we try and make this show as interactive as possible. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. If you leave a tip or donation with a comment, it'll pop up on screen for everybody to see. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. Starting off the show, though, I want to dive into that Team USA win from last night. They faced off against Team Canada in the first official exhibition game for Team USA ahead of the 2024 Olympics. They end up winning this game 86-72. Neither team was necessarily gunning for this win. Team Canada kind of pulled their significant players in that fourth quarter, and win or loss didn't really mean anything as to the Olympics themselves, but I thought it was still a lot of fun to watch this all go down. And before we get into the game itself, I'm a little bit of a nerd to some degree about the international expansion of basketball. It's something that I am fascinated with and am really hoping to see it continue to take off in years to come. And last night, Team USA played a Canadian team that has 10 current NBA players. That is a record for the most ever current NBA players for any nation other than the United States. And not to mention as well that they are being coached by Jordi Fernandez, who was just named the Brooklyn Nets head coach earlier this offseason. So again, the international growth of the game is just something that I find to be fascinating, and I think it's a lot of fun that we seem like we could be getting to a place where there is, a higher level of competition across the globe. So I think that was just something that definitely stood out to me at first, seeing 5 pretty prominent NBA players in Team Canada's starting lineup probably going to be, if Team USA is going to face any sort of threats, Canada has to be up there in terms of level of competition. But as we sort of saw from last night, when the U.S. is clicking, I don't think that there is going to be another nation that can stop them. And, it was an ugly game for Team USA, 17 turnovers overall. We saw them get off to an awful start when they went down 11-1. They had 8 turnovers in that first quarter, and it was a pretty brutal first shift. They missed their first 6 shots, and, Kevin Durant did not play in this game because he's dealing with an injury, so I'm sure that starting lineup is going to look different moving forward inherently, because you have to imagine KD is in there. Last night it was Steph Curry, Drew Holiday, Devin Booker, LeBron James, and Joel Embiid. Would probably have to imagine that it is Holiday or Booker that is bumped out of the starting lineup. I know that, when you look at the conversation in terms of the best players in the world, Drew Holiday would sort of be the easy person to bump out of that starting lineup. But you hear about the way that the selection members of Team USA rave about Drew Holiday, that he's always a priority to try and bring in. Grant Hill was talking about it on the broadcast during the second half of that game as well. So we'll see there. I would imagine he is probably the one who gets bumped to the second unit. But, the Team USA offense just looked disjointed early on, and it's a fact. It was sort of to be expected, considering the fact that you look at the other international teams. Team US has such little cohesive experience with one another throughout these years, where Canada won the bronze medal last year in the FIBA World Cup, and they ran back just about the entire roster, and that's with a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and with a Dylan Brooks, and all of these players. Really, SGA is on a tier of his own in terms of the talent level on Team USA, on Team Canada, that is. But he was willing to play last year. He's familiar with all of these guys for Team Canada, so they have. The U.S. is maybe at a little bit of a disadvantage from that perspective, but once the U.S. is off and running, they are going to be, borderline impossible to stop. And I would have to imagine they're going to win the gold this year, but we will see. But as for, the actual makings of this roster, it was clear that the second lineup was sort of the jolt of energy that they needed, which does dive into an interesting conversation about Anthony Edwards, who, within the past week or so has had a lot of quotes about how he sees himself as the number one option on this team. And, being a 22-year-old that is not established himself in the league the same way, you sort of scoff at those comments, looking at the level of competition. But he ended up, I believe he was their leading scorer last night with 13 points. Very well-rounded effort from the U.S. But him and Jayson Tatum, it was funny because, I think that it was almost a little bit of a microcosm. You look at the first lineup, they were a little bit rusty. Obviously, they're still great and everything, but bursting onto the scene was Anthony Edwards and Jayson Tatum leading the second lineup. Anthony Davis was also tremendous off of the bench as well, but Edwards and Tatum, two of the players that have been talked about most as the future face of the league, and they were both spectacular in this game and really ignited the energy for Team USA. So again, as much as Edwards, he makes those comments about how he sees himself as the number one option, you sort of laugh at it, but at the same time, he played like it last night, and we're talking about one game. Can't imagine he's going to work his way into the starting lineup here, but he was basically Captain America last summer with the FIBA team, and that was with other established players on the roster, and he took over then, he took over last night. So gonna be interesting to see sort of the dynamics there in terms of the older generation versus the new guys. But another thing that did sort of stand out to me was the fit of Joel Embiid with this roster. He was in the starting lineup, of course, and through the first few minutes, and again, it was a very rusty start for everybody that was in the game at that point. But just how Embiid played into the rest of the starters was a little bit interesting to me. Again, when you are in a rut offensively, typically what teams do is they lean on their best player to go get you a bucket. And Joel Embiid, he looked at least like he was the clear mismatch for Team USA, where he had Dwight Powell on him. Powell, of course, on the Dallas Mavericks, sort of fell out of the rotation. But, Embiid just had a ton of size on him, and he started this game off on a pretty rough stretch. He posted up Powell twice. He missed a shot, and then Powell actually stripped him for a steal. We saw Embiid sort of jacking up a three-point attempt at one point that I didn't love either. So, Embiid ends up fouling out in the third quarter of this game, something along the lines of 15 minutes. And I'm sure that it's just going to take a little bit of adjustment for him. I have no worries as to, the caliber of player he is or anything. But I do wonder if you see Anthony Davis have a double-double with 4 blocks, and, Steve Kerr sort of praised the double big lineup of having Anthony Davis play alongside Bam Adebayo, which was interesting to me when they first rolled it out there. But that is also one of the bigger keys for the U.S. in these games, is the fact that they are going to have just about an unmatched interior presence. Now, Team France with Victor Wembanyama and Rudy Gobert are going to have their names in that conversation as well, and I am fascinated to see the two of them play with one another. But again, Anthony Davis, I think, just has a little bit more of a malleable skill set, whereas Embiid, I think, is the number one option just about everywhere. So seeing how he plays into, a team setting with more talented players around him is at least something that I'm keeping an eye on. Now, again, the coaches are actually with these players through training camps and everything, so they have the best idea of the configuration of this roster. But it was something that at least kind of stood out to me a little bit. But another big standout for me was Tyrese Halliburton, and he is one of the players that I think has gotten a little bit of disrespect through these conversations about whether or not he deserves to be there, and I thought he was tremendous last night. He plays very well into the team system. Yes, he is a little bit more on ball, but I was really impressed with specifically his defense is really what caught my eye, was the fact that he was, hustling all over the place. And it makes me think that as this Pacers core continues to develop, that Halliburton does have, the skill sets, and I think, just the overall ability to mesh really well with other stars that, it's interesting because he's obviously the franchise cornerstone for Indiana, but when he wasn't asked to do quite as much creation himself, we saw the other parts of his game elevate. And that is something that, again, Halliburton, I think that him and the Pacers get so much disrespect from, the NBA community. And I really do like what they're building there. And I thought that Halliburton had himself a very nice game. But other than that, again, this was not a super high stakes event necessarily. Like I mentioned, Team Canada sort of took their foot off the gas. They were still within reach in this game, which is why, you can say this game was never really in doubt for the U.S., but also if Canada wanted to make it closer, they very possibly could have. And, the U.S. sort of mirrored a lot of the bench minutes with Canada. So, you can make the argument on either side. But it's going to be interesting to see, no doubt. Because the U.S. should be, I would say, borderline untouchable this summer. And especially as we see Kevin Durant return to play, I have a very hard time pointing to the team that is going to, step in their way. But it'll be interesting to see, without a doubt. Their qualifying group for the group stage, it's going to be them, Serbia, of course, with Nikola Jokic, and then South Sudan and Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has a couple players, but, really, eyes are going to be on that game versus Serbia on July 28th to see, Jokic versus Embiid, Jokic versus all the best players on the U.S. Now, how much help he's going to have is probably not going to be enough to take down this juggernaut, but will be interesting to see there. And then the last sort of note I did have on this game, also, the fact that, you look at the talent in terms of the players themselves, then they pan over to the coaches on the bench there at one point for Team USA. It was Steve Kerr, Eric Spoelstra was there, Mark Few of Gonzaga was there, and they had some other names in there as well that I should have marked down. But, just top, players, coaches, they just have, all of the best in the world, basically. But last note here was pretty funny to see Dillon Brooks versus LeBron James, and the arena was throwing out some boos to Dillon Brooks, who of course is a little bit, he's a lot of it probably a villain, and he fully embraces that. And him and LeBron got into a little shoving thing. There was a Team USA turnover on a pass to LeBron, and, just around at the baseline for the inbound, Brooks was trying to steal the ball from LeBron. LeBron was sort of shoving him off. So, a little bit of drama there that was pretty entertaining to see. But, other than that, let me know what you think about, the first impressions here of Team USA as they enter these Olympics. I think it's just going to be a lot of fun to watch, because actually, before we go here, the biggest moment of the game, at least in my eyes, was the lob from Steph Curry to LeBron James on the fast break. And, it's just going to be so fun to watch them play together, because again, we get these sort of types of moments in the All-Star game, but it doesn't mean anything because it's not competitive whatsoever. But this is kind of the last ride. Like, you have to imagine, you never want to put a cap on LeBron's longevity, but kind of feels like this is going to be his last Olympics at 39 years old, and Steph Curry getting up there as well. So, just appreciate this while you can, because it is crazy the amount of talent that this team has. You have, 3 all-timers, like all-timers in terms of LeBron, Curry, Kevin Durant that are going to be playing together, and we're likely never going to get, this type of run with them again. So I'm really looking forward to it. I was feeling very patriotic watching the game last night, but again, let me know what your main takeaways were. But we're going to be shifting gears here to some actual conversations about the NBA itself. There are some reports that have come out over the past day or so that the Cleveland Cavaliers are potentially looking to sign forward Evan Mobley to a max contract extension. And, we've seen 3 of his 2021 draft class members already get those. So I want to give some thoughts on the Cavaliers situation in particular, and the overall practice of these teams, jumping out to make sure that they lock down their guys a year ahead of time. So we are going to be diving into that, but first take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, no, this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's some losing shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, and we're going to be moving on here to be discussing the rumors surrounding the Cleveland Cavaliers and their young forward, Evan Mobley. ESPN's Brian Windhorst reported that he is expecting the Cavaliers to give Mobley the rookie max extension. This is the same deal that we have seen the likes of Scotty Barnes, Cade Cunningham, and Franz Wagner all receive within the past couple weeks. Now, it's interesting, especially considering the fact that for the Cavaliers during this negotiation process, we'll start there. Evan Mobley kind of has the high ground considering the fact that two players that were drafted after him in Scotty and Franz both already got this deal. And, Scotty Barnes was just an all-star this past year, granted as a replacement. But, Scotty, I think, has a very bright future, and I was all on board for that. Now, I did not like the Franz Wagner extension for the Orlando Magic, but just the fact that they decided to give it out at least is something that Mobley is going to have a very hard time, taking less than that. And Mobley has been a very solid player for them. And not just that, but, was all NBA or all defense first team in 2022-23 and actually finished as a finalist for the Defensive Player of the Year award in 23 when he finished third. So, I think that Mobley definitely has a one-up in terms of the resume over Wagner, and the fact that also you saw in the playoffs we saw Mobley sort of go to this different level where he had, I believe it was a career high points in a single game. He averaged 16 as a whole on 56% from the field. So Mobley is kind of riding high right now, and I'm sure when he saw specifically that Franz deal cross the table that he was definitely knowing he was going to get paid, and that was probably a reality anyways, but it does leave the Cavaliers in this place where they are a little bit vulnerable, because how are they going to convince him to take less money than his peers who have already gotten paid? And that sort of does bring us on to the conversation as to whether or not it is beneficial for the Cavaliers to wait this out. And we are still very new into this new collective bargaining agreement in terms of the way that we have this hard cap. There's the luxury tax aprons as well. And it does make me think that there are a couple ways you look at this, because in the old NBA, without a doubt, we just saw it a few years ago, you want to call it, with DeAndre Ayton, when he entered restricted free agency for the first time in his career. And at that point, it was pretty messy between him and the Phoenix Suns. That was when, they were at the peak of their powers in terms of the Chris Paul and Devin Booker configuration of that roster, and they had just been coming off of a finals run, and there was definitely some discontent and some tension between Monty Williams and the Phoenix Suns versus DeAndre Ayton. And Ayton went out in free agency, and the Pacers offered him this massive offer sheet, and the Phoenix Suns, who had Ayton as a restricted free agent, just decided they weren't going to let him get away for nothing. And that is a little bit of the case as well for, any of these franchises now headed into this next iteration of how we look at NBA free agency and the financial implications. But I do feel like there might be a world where teams aren't necessarily going to be willing to throw out these massive contract deals at young players just for the sake of taking up money, because, if you're talking about a player that's a good, not great option, paying them $50 million a year can significantly handicap you moving forward at this point. And, that being said, I think that Evan Mobley is definitely, close to that Scotty Barnes tier, I should say, in that I think that they can be, number two options on a really good championship contender, that they provide you a lot of versatility in terms of defense. And, Mobley's offense still has to develop a little bit more. That's been the main concern with him. And it is a little bit of that conversation as well when you talk about the fit between him and Jarrett Allen and what this Cavaliers team is going to decide to do, because the Cavs are a very expensive starting lineup at the minimum, where they already have Donovan Mitchell on this brand new crazy deal. And the way that this is all shaping out, it seems like he's going to be getting that, mega max contract where he's going to be making $75 million in a few years. Whether or not they're going to be able to afford that, you have Darius Garland on a max who's going to be, it's this upcoming year, it's $36 million, and it's going to get up to $45 million by the end of his deal. And then you're going to add on this 5-year, $225 million deal for Mobley. That is a ton of money to have invested in, your starting lineup alone. And especially one where you have questions about the fit with one another. And that is where I feel like we start to look at, and I've been, on board with the Cavaliers making a move that really since last summer I was calling for. I want them to make some type of a trade to break up that front court specifically is what I'm looking at, because I am a big believer in Evan Mobley, but I'm not sure he's ever going to be fully optimized offensively when he's alongside Jarrett Allen. And the fact that we have seen his developmental path be extremely rushed these past couple years because of the fact that the Cavaliers went out and made this deal for Donovan Mitchell and immediately put themselves in the contenders conversation. So again, I think that Evan Mobley ultimately can be worth that money. Him and Scotty Barnes, Cade Cunningham to me was the no-brainer of the group. And I know that Cade, I'm talking about accolades and resumes, and Cade has been on the worst team in the NBA for multiple years now, and he missed basically the entire 2022-23 season with an injury. So it's not a perfect, a conversation, but I just believe in the talent of Cade, and I do believe in Scotty and Evan Mobley as well. But all in all here, I think that it is a pretty risky move, and it's not quite the same as an NFL situation when a quarterback hits the open market. There is going to be a team that overpays him. That's definitely possible in the NBA, but are teams going to pay more than that 5-year, $225 million deal? And it kind of feels like it's a situation where the Cavaliers and the Magic with their deal and the Raptors, they're just trying to make sure that they don't cause any amount of friction between them and their star player in terms of, getting off on a bad foot and making them unhappy, especially if you are in a situation like the Cavaliers where they're a very good team and they expect to, be in the realm of contention next year. But we saw Darius Garland as well frustrated with his role with the team. And, again, I think that overall the construction of this roster has what it takes to be in the conversation. I just, talent-wise, I just don't know if I see the fit. And all that to be said, it feels like the Cavs are just trying to play a little bit of defense here and make sure they don't upset a young player that they think they can build around in Evan Mobley. But there's also no guarantees as to what he'll become. And that's how I felt about the Franz Wagner deal as well, that you are looking at, players that there's a chance they couldn't be a top 3 offensive option on a championship team. Now, Mobley, I think, has higher upside defensively, that you can take that risk a little bit more, but it is sort of just an overall statement on the NBA as to, are teams actually playing this right? And I mentioned it before, the Houston Rockets have decided that they are going to be holding off on giving out contract extensions for both Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün, which is something that I like both of those players. I probably feel better about both of those players than Franz Wagner. I don't want to go definitively just yet. But, this is going to be a conversation next year as well, where you look at Paolo, I think, is a no-brainer. Chet Holmgren is probably a no-brainer. But then after that, Jabari Smith Jr., probably worth it. Keegan Murray, been a really good player for the Kings the past couple years, but are you going to be ready to give him $50-60 million a year? Jaden Ivey is probably that same sort of questionable tier. Benedict Mathurin. So it's just something to consider. And I do feel like teams could maybe benefit a little bit more in this contract negotiation process from the, hard salary caps where it screws over a lot of teams, but this might actually be an area where they can benefit from it. Again, this is something that's still very new, and only time will tell as to whether or not that is actually the reality, that teams can get away with sort of, banking on other teams not being willing to spend the same amount, but, we'll see. Again, Evan Mobley is probably in a vacuum worth this contract extension, but I don't know. I also feel like you could definitely wait it out and not be beating yourself up about it, especially considering the fact that, all of these players are on their rookie deals, meaning that they are going to be restricted free agents when they ultimately do hit it. So you can just kind of play out the market a little bit, and unless you're expecting some massive jump from a player, I don't know if I would be rushing to give out these big time deals. But let me know how you feel in the comments section. But we are going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, I want to evaluate the current situation with the San Antonio Spurs, who signed Chris Paul in one of my favorite deals of the offseason and brought in some additional veteran talent as well, such as Harrison Barnes, and talk about what it means for the future of this team, whether or not Chris Paul is going to be able to have a big effect on the Spurs. So we're going to be diving into that. But first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we continue to talk some NBA here. Just wrapped up talking about the Cavaliers' plans with Evan Mobley, but I want to shift gears here to the San Antonio Spurs, who have had a pretty good offseason in my eyes, where, through the draft, obviously, having 2 picks in the top 8, they had a chance to, add a lot of potential to the roster. Ultimately, they draft Stephon Castle, one of my favorite prospects, with the 4th overall pick, and then ended up trading that 8th pick for, 2030 and 31, I think it was, swaps, which had me pretty disappointed because the 8th pick ended up being Rob Dillingham, and I would have loved to see him with Wembanyama as well. But the fact that they made this type of a move sort of led to a chain events here where they were able to have a little bit more cap space, and they end up bringing in Chris Paul on a 1-year deal worth $11 million. And then additionally, for the cost of, I think they might have thrown in a second round pick, years down the road, they got Harrison Barnes as well, who is a player that, obviously his best days are past him, and you say the same thing about Chris Paul as well, but players that still have been around, they've been around winning. I know that Chris Paul hasn't won a ring necessarily, but obviously, was on countless playoff teams, was the starting point guard and, debatably best player on the Suns at least at that time that they were there. And you go out and get Harrison Barnes too, who, again, his better years are behind him, but he's played in 82 games in 2 straight years, started, all 164 of them, is an efficient scorer, of course, won the championship with the Warriors all those years ago. So it is something that is really interesting to, see how this all is going to, play out in the long run, because the Spurs last year were in a position that they just didn't really have they didn't have enough talent around the young phenom of Victor Wembanyama, and they were trying out a bunch of different, almost basketball experiments throughout the course of the year. Of course, Jeremy Sohan being one of the biggest ones there, but that just did not work. And there was just a lack of, competent options around him. Now, I'm a big fan of Devin Vassell, and I think that he is also somebody that they can, build around to some degree. Him and Wembanyama can be a really nice 1-2 punch. Keldon Johnson, unfortunately, took a big step backwards. I was a big fan of him for his first couple years, but just did not have the season that the Spurs were hoping for. And, Chris Paul last year, when you look at his stint with the Warriors, he was dealing with injuries early in the year as well, which sort of limited him being able to really establish himself in that rotation necessarily with the Warriors. He played in 58 games, played about 26 minutes per game, but he was more of a bench option for them, and I'm curious to see whether or not they are ultimately going to start him. Again, it's kind of weird because you look at the fact that you're talking about Chris Paul, who is going to be an undoubted, first ballot Hall of Famer, but also at this point, I don't know. I mean, who do you think is better at this point, Trey Jones or Chris Paul? I think the fact that we're even having that conversation is substantial for sure, but at the same time, Chris Paul is just a presence that I think is going to have a very real impact on the Spurs. And Paul spoke to the media a couple days ago, and he talked about how he came to play basketball. He didn't come to coach, and he's focused on himself and trying to have a better season. He would like to grab back some of the magic that we saw from him from years. Now, I don't know if I'd necessarily be putting my bank account on that happening, but I still think that Chris Paul is just going to be an addition for this Spurs team that is going to be very substantial in terms of, minimum just having players around him, having guards that can make the proper passes and put him up in positions to succeed. And that's with Paul, that is with Stephon Castle, where again, I do hope that Paul does lean a little bit into the mentorship role. Now, if he wants to go out and get his, I 100% stand with that. I wouldn't expect anything less from a competitor like him, but Stephon Castle is a prospect that really feels like if he could develop some of those more traditional point guard skills as well, that his ceiling is extremely high, and I would love to see him, be willing to do that. So we'll see there. They end up taking Nunez in the second round as well, point guard from Spain that is actually on the Spain team. Curious to see whether or not he gets any run time, but it's something that I'm at least curious about there because he's known as a very good pick and roll ball handler, and that would be something that would be very impactful for the future of Wemby's career, where again, it's just a matter of actually having players around him that can make the right basketball play. And again, I feel like I'm in a little bit of a weird spot with Jeremy Sohan. I've talked about it before. I was never really all that high on him, and now after this past year, because everybody is so fixated on Wembanyama and they want, the best for him possible, that it wasn't Sohan's fault that Popovich decided to run him at the point guard and try out that failed experiment. That now everybody thinks he's, a bum. I don't think it's that far, but I also don't have that much faith in him myself. So a little bit of a weird dynamic there, at least for me internally, when talking about the evaluation of this Spurs core. But, being able to add two legitimate veterans who know what they're doing on a basketball court is going to put the Spurs in a decent position. Now, you look at the Western Conference and you really can't feel like the Spurs have all that much of a chance to, top, especially in this deep West, make their way into a play-in spot. But I mean, you look at some of the other teams in the Western Conference and, you look at the very bottom. We'll see what the Jazz end up doing in terms of whether or not they move on from Lauri Markkanen. But, you have the Trailblazers in there as well. I think that there is maybe a possibility that the Spurs could at least be hovering a little bit in that range that the Rockets were last year of being a well-coached team, having some really nice youth talent, bringing in a couple veterans in the offseason, and ultimately falling short, but at least, playing meaningful basketball into, like 80% of the way through the season. Talk about, into March, still at least having hope of making the playoffs. Now, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here. Obviously, it very much depends on the development of Victor Wembanyama, who people are sort of racing to give him top 10 status in the league. Now, I understand why that would be the case. I still want to, at least see it play out a little bit more before I'm ready to just pencil him in to top 10 perennially. But we're probably, on the brink of that at this point, where he's a top 20. You can't name me 20 players in the NBA that are better than Victor Wembanyama, in my opinion. So, and again, considering the circumstances that were around him, I had this debate with a friend of mine on the 4th of July about, how many players actually could have taken that Spurs team last year to a play-in tournament spot. I don't think the list is longer than 3. I think it is probably just Nikola Jokic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Luka Doncic, and that is probably it. And this was a 22-win team, even with Wembanyama being as special as he was. So, I don't know. I have very high hopes for the Spurs this year. Not in terms of actual contention, but I think they're going to have to be, a borderline league pass team that you're putting on a nightly basis when they are playing. But, again, I don't want to go overboard here in terms of the Wembanyama excitement and put him and the Spurs into conversations that they're just not ready to be in yet. But I love what they did this offseason in terms of just adding enough competence around the core that they have, and they're still multiple pieces away, but as long as you believe in Wembanyama, the prospect, where I don't think I've met anybody who doesn't believe in him at this point, that they are going to be in a very good position for years to come. But let me know how you feel, where you think the Spurs end up lining up in the overall hierarchy of the Western Conference, and whether or not you think Chris Paul will have a big impact on the team. But we are going to be now diving into the MLB Home Run Derby and the current state of the event. We have the full list of participants that we are going to be diving into, but before we do all of that, we're going to have to take a quick break here. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Now we're going to be moving on here to talking about the MLB participants for the Home Run Derby, running through everybody that was selected and talking about just where we stand here with the MLB Home Run Derby in 2024, because it does feel like the MLB All-Star festivities are probably the events that garner the most excitement. Now, part of it is probably circumstantial because of the fact that the summer is obviously typically a pretty dry time in terms of the sports cycle, and for whatever it's worth, also the other events are kind of jokes as well. Of course, the Pro Bowl is a travesty, and the NBA All-Star Game hasn't been competitive in years, other than that one season where they did that tribute for Kobe and the way that they had the target scores and everything. But for the most part, MLB All-Star Game is the one that is the most competitive and exciting, and the Home Run Derby is obviously a very big part of that, because who doesn't like to see a bunch of guys walk out there and hit baseballs as far as they possibly can. So I'm going to run through the participants here. You see on the screen, Jose Ramirez is the first selection here. You see the stats on the screen: 275 batting average, a 530 slugging percentage, and an 860 OPS with 23 home runs. I am a member of Team Respect J-Ram. There's been some amount of backlash to him for whatever reason over the past couple weeks. Now, granted, I am a Red Sox fan, so maybe part of it is because my Twitter is slightly biased towards, Rafael Devers, but I've seen a number of people sort of trying to tear down Jose Ramirez, but I referenced this on my show yesterday where, the Guardians dropping, at least they lost their game yesterday. They're down right now today as well, but a couple days ago in game 1 of that series against the Tigers, J-Ram got on base 3 straight times with a single, and a double, and the Tigers refused to pitch to him the rest of the game, intentionally walked him 3 straight times. Including in the 10th inning. Why is that? It is because of the fact that, he is a scary man to face when you are a pitcher and he is standing at the plate. So, again, 23 home runs on the season. He mashes, and he is absolutely deserving to be in the position that he currently is in. Next up, we have Alec Boehm of the Philadelphia Phillies. No surprise here that the Phillies had to, considering that they are the best team in baseball right now, they have been for the entirety of the year, that they were going to have a representative. Now, you see the 11 home runs with him. Obviously not somebody who has been, totally smashing it out of the park all year long. He's getting his first ever start, I believe, in the All-Star Game this year, and well-deserved. 292 batting average, 481 slugging percentage, 824 OPS. I mean, Boehm is an incredible player. A little bit of a winding road for him to get to this place. Not the number 1 home run hitter for the Philadelphia Phillies in this situation. I would have loved to see Kyle Schwarber or Bryce Harper, but Harper he's kind of just too big for the event at this point. Schwarber was not selected as an all-star. Going to be very difficult for the MLB to, get players to give up their vacations to come and, put their bodies through. Not that it's extremely, physically taxing, but of course with sort of the reputation of the Home Run Derby and how it can mess up your swing, that, Boehm, if you're going to get a if you're going to get representation from the Phillies, Bohm is just kind of where they had to settle, and ultimately, very good player. I'm rooting for him because he is an incredible personality. Bobby Witt Jr., one of my favorite players in the MLB. The Royals are having a very surprising season, and it's in large part due to the top of their lineup that is held down by Bobby Witt Jr., who's having an incredible season. 325 batting average, 560 slugging, 931 OPS with 15 home runs. Bobby Witt Jr., being able to get him and another name on this list that we'll be getting to momentarily, and having these young stars be able to be willing to do these types of events is a very big deal. Adley Rutschman was in the home run derby, I believe it was last year, and that sort of put him on to, national notice for maybe some of the more casual fans. Bobby Witt Jr. is a stud. He is going to be for, I think, a decade plus probably, and a team coming from a team like the Royals, who have been a really good feel-good story, are in the hunt of a playoff spot, currently sitting at 51-43. I really like that they were able to get Bobby Witt Jr. in on this. But I mentioned there's another young star stepping up to the plate in this, and that is Gunnar Henderson. Just mentioned as well, Adley Rutschman, of course, his teammate for the Orioles. These are the two starters that the O's have in the All-Star game this year, and Gunnar Henderson is an absolute beast. Both playing the same position as well, shortstop, so Henderson ended up edging out Bobby Witt Jr. for that starting spot at shortstop in the American League, but two incredible talents. You see the stats on the screen for Henderson: 292 batting average, 594 slugging, 975 OPS, and 27 home runs. I gotta be honest, when he came up, I knew he was, I think he was the number one prospect as he was coming up. I didn't know he had this type of power behind his bat, and it is fully coming to fruition here. Of course, won Rookie of the Year last season, and, an incredible player. Again, being able to put him and Bobby Witt Jr. on a pedestal for this event are the types of inclusions that I think that this event really needs, because as we get further down in the list, you'll see there was maybe a little bit of desperation from the MLB in terms of who they were looking to select. And Adolis Garcia is part of that conversation. Now, I'm a huge fan of Adolis, and I think that he is a monster player. You see the 17 home runs. Now, he is having a down statistical season, really, since he became, a prominent starter. And I'll double check the year itself. It was 2020, I think, is when he really became a full-time starter. It was 21, which is where he started to, get more of his looks. But, since then, the lowest batting average of his career at 215. Numbers are pretty much down across the board, but, homers have always been his thing. With that 17, I think that, especially coming off of a World Series championship with the Rangers last year, the fact that this is taking place in Arlington, Texas, he isn't even necessarily going out of his way to travel and giving up a vacation. He was already in Texas, and he's gonna have a chance to be the hometown star for this event. And again, I'm just a really big fan of him, so I do understand that, you talk about who has earned it this season necessarily and who the most deserving are. At the end of the day, the MLB and this event at this point, frankly, doesn't necessarily have that moral high ground where you don't have, a number of MLB All-Stars lining up to do this event, that they sort of had to pull its strings a little bit. And again, I'm not trying to disrespect Adolis whatsoever, because I am a very big fan of him, but not his best year. But I am glad that we're going to get to see him in this situation, because with that power, the man can rake. And I do think that he's going to be a star in this one. Probably, sneaky odds to win this event. Teoscar Hernandez just signed with the LA Dodgers this past year, and he is able to, I want to say this is his first All-Star appearance. I can double check that on the fly here, but Hernandez has been, an extremely talented player for a number of years. So he's a two-time All-Star. He also was in 2021 with the Toronto Blue Jays. Makes sense because since his days with the Blue Jays, I think he's been one of the more underrated players in the MLB. And this year he's putting it together with the Dodgers, who are, of course, having an incredible season. 257 batting average, 477 slug, 796 OPS with 19 home runs. Hernandez is also a great addition. I think he announced it for the first time when he was on the national broadcast last night, when he was being interviewed by the ESPN booth. The game, obviously, between them and the Phillies was on ESPN. And I think that they made the announcement then sort of similar to, I'm pretty sure it was Adley Rutschman just a few weeks ago who also made his announcement in the same way. So good for Hernandez. He definitely deserves it. And then the last one here, Marcell Ozuna. If we're talking strictly baseball, he absolutely deserves it. You see the numbers: 296 batting average, 568 slug, 942 OPS, and 24 home runs. I believe he leads the National League in RBIs this season, and he is, having an, borderline MVP caliber year. Now, Shohei is in his conference, so that is always going to be a tough thing to overcome, but obviously, the off-the-field stuff with Ozuna that I don't want to dive into too much because I know, the blanket details. I don't know everything about the situation, so I don't want to misspeak here and get myself in trouble. But Ozuna, because of his legal issues, is definitely not the most popular athlete in MLB, and for good reason. You can do your own research on all of that. And I think the fact that he is a participant here does sort of go to speak to the level of desperation that the league has, because for somebody to be arrested on suspicion of domestic violence, to be put up on the stage, in front of the whole crowd and introduce him and give him this, big ovation and everything, it feels very weird, and I think that, the majority of MLB fans are probably hoping that he doesn't end up winning this thing, because it is a little bit of a gross conversation that's going to come with that. And the fact for the MLB to even put themselves in this type of a situation, to have somebody do the things that he did, to be caught on video with, other issues as well outside of the domestic violence, it is not a very good sign for kind of where the MLB is at in terms of enticing their stars to participate in the home run derby. I think that it sort of goes to show that the league needs to maybe incentivize it a little bit more. I think it's $1 million and maybe a truck or something along those lines for winners of the home run derby, but probably have to, pay them to even participate and maybe up the ante a little bit. But let me know whether or not you in the comment section have any better suggestions as to how the MLB can better incentivize this, because again, with this situation, it's not going to be all pretty when this comes out, and there's going to be a very large elephant in the room when Ozuna steps up to the plate of what should just be a fun event, and there is a little bit of kind of gross conversations that are going to go along with it beside the event itself. But let me know how you feel in the comment section. We're going to be taking our final break of the show now, though, and when we come back on the other side, I want to dive into Angel Reese, who is, of course, the WNBA rookie phenom. She has this historic streak going on of 14 straight double-doubles, which is without a doubt impressive, but the way that she went about it in yesterday's game to extend it to 14 just sort of further goes to show why some of these double-doubles, triple-doubles are a little bit overrated, and why I'm not necessarily in on Angel Reese quite in the same way that other people are. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where I want to touch on Angel Reese's double-double streak. And the Chicago Sky rookie has been, you can say she's been a phenom since she was with LSU during the college days, won a national championship there, and she currently has the longest streak of double-doubles in WNBA history, with 14 that she added to that total with the Sky's game on Wednesday afternoon against the Atlanta Dream. And she is having an incredible rookie season across the board and is going to be, of course, in conversations for the Rookie of the Year award. It's her and it's Caitlin Clark. You look at her numbers across the board: 14 points per game, 11.9 rebounds per game, with some pretty good defensive metrics as well. Now, she was just named as well Eastern Conference Player of the Year, or of the week, I should say, just last week. And she has her share of critics because she's been pretty vocal, I would say, over the past couple years about a number of different things. Sort of just, I think for the most part, it is the Caitlin Clark fans. And, I'm a fan of Caitlin Clark too, even if I am a little bit more on the casual side of women's basketball. And Angel Reese, she kind of denies it. Seems like there's a rivalry there. And again, she'll turn it down every time. I kind of wish she would just embrace the fact that no, she doesn't like Caitlin Clark, or, at least that she openly, I just want her to be open about the fact that there is some sort of tension there, and she kind of downplays it and makes it seem like we're all sort of making this up, even though it's pretty clear from all of her sort of subliminal shots that there is at least something. But, that's all besides the point. But, yesterday, she put up a very impressive stat line against Atlanta: 11 points, 13 rebounds, 2 assists, 3 steals, and 3 blocks. And her streak of double-doubles continues, but it looked like that was not going to be the case. The Sky were up 76-69 with, 10 seconds left in the game. I think it was 14 specifically, when Kennedy Carter grabbed a defensive rebound, dribbled it up the court, and looked like she was ready to just dribble out the clock. But Angel Reese then ran down the court and then started posting up a defender and was calling for the ball a bunch. Carter didn't really realize what was going on. Ultimately, she passed it to a teammate who gave it to Reese, who tried to throw up a shot quickly, and she ended up getting fouled and going to the free throw line to knock them both down. And at that point, those were her 10th and 11th points. So she officially clinched the double-double there with those free throws. And, it's really not that big of a deal. And I want to sort of start by saying this, that, the unwritten rule of, not scoring when the game is over, I understand there are different opinions on it. I think it's weak when there is sort of no rivalry or anything. Like, I love when things get chippy, and if somebody wants to throw down a mean dunk at the end of the game just to sort of give an FU to the other team if there's some bad blood, like, I'm always for the drama there. But this was purely an individual accolade thing where she only had 9 points, and she knew that, her double-double streak, frankly, is kind of the biggest argument for her to win the Rookie of the Year award. Now, I'm sure that she's not thinking about Caitlin Clark specifically when she's going about this, but the game is over. And she is trying to, stat padding is a sort of buzzword that gets thrown around a lot, I feel like, in the overarching basketball community. But that is exactly what this is, because she understood she needed one more point to get to a certain mark that, quantifies a double-double. And it was for nothing other than her own personal glory, which, at the same time, I understand the buzzer hasn't sounded yet. If anybody on Atlanta felt that passionate about it, they should have played better defense. Again, I'm saying this sort of from the side here, from my couch, essentially, and it means nothing to her ultimately, and that's totally fine. I just feel like now as a basketball community, we're going to continue to praise this streak that, I just think that double-doubles and triple-doubles have been overrated for some time. And I think that the tip of the iceberg was when Russell Westbrook won his MVP. Thunder were a 5 seed, and Russ had an incredible season, and I understand it was history because the fact that it hadn't been done since Oscar Robertson, when TVs were still playing games in black and white. But it was, I think that it's so overblown. I thought that James Harden deserved the MVP. I think this was 2017 that went down in the NBA. And it's just, I don't know. I really don't think that a double-double or a triple-double is that, inducive of winning. Now, that being said, pretty sure you look at the numbers, there was some interesting trends in terms of the Nuggets record when Jokic recorded a triple-double versus when he didn't. And the same can be said for Westbrook as well. So I know I'm also sort of disproving my own point here, but there is no argument that those extra 2 points from Angel Reese, did anything other than boost her own ego and resume. And again, it's not the end of the world by any means if this is how she's gonna, go about it. But she's made it very clear that she cares a lot about this record, and, she should have pride in it. Like, this is, obviously, she's making history as a rookie. So, give her flowers for that. But I just think it's it's stupid how we glorify these stats. And, you're talking, I am somebody who played my share of, rec league basketball, and I probably never recorded a double-double myself. So, maybe I'm not the most qualified person to be talking about this, but I still just think that it's kind of ridiculous, the glory that we put on, these types of accomplishments when, it's just going to continue on here. We're going to completely forget about this, the fact that she went to this extent to keep the streak going, but it's very clearly something that she is taking into account when she's playing these games. And again, find your personal motivation anywhere in life, really, like whatever it takes. But I just think that it's kind of a ridiculous practice that we do to, glorify a streak that, again, means nothing. And then when you read articles about what went down yesterday, it's her further solidifying herself as the front runner for the Rookie of the Year award. Why, though? Because she scored 2 free throws when the game was already over, and not just, fourth quarter stats adding on or whatever. Like, I know that Jayson Tatum, during the finals this past year, if you weren't a Jayson Tatum fan, there were people saying, oh, well, he was, stat padding and trying to stat pad in the fourth quarter or whatever, and add on to his averages and whatnot. But at that point, even if it was a double-digit lead, 15-point lead at that point, the Celtics had just shown in Game 3 that they were capable of blowing a 20-point lead. There's no time to take your foot off the gas there. Like, this game was legitimately over with 6 seconds left, and Angel Reese was going out of her way to make this happen. And again, I'm talking about something that I understand is kind of stupid and really is not that big of a deal, but it's just something that I felt pretty strongly about, and I think that it goes to the overall basketball community of the way that we prop up these things that really aren't that significant. And I think at this point I am out on the double-double streak with Angel Reese. Now, she can be a really good player and impact winning, and again, she was incredible defensively yesterday, so I'm not saying that takes away from her as a player, but from here on out, I don't care about that double-double streak, and that doesn't really fit as an argument to me as to what the value of Angel Reese is. And I don't know. Let me know in the comments section if you think I'm being too harsh on this. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe. Check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always, 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. And we will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn.